What's going on, guys? Rich from OSA here. I'm here with Crazy Asian Airsoft. Pete, how you doing today?
Doing well, Richie. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So today, guys, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna talk about what we think is better or what our opinions are on AEGs versus HPA.
Just to start with, it's a very debated topic, and so many people, this is a super hot topic, and it has been for years, and I think it will continue to be as both HPA and AEG continue to improve and fix the problems that have been happening with them, and companies are constantly improving. So we're here not to necessarily try and make you choose one over the other. We're here to show you the pros and cons of both, so that way you can decide for yourself.
Yeah, definitely more of an educational talk rather than telling you to choose one or the other, like Pete said. So I think the first thing is we'll touch on HPA. So what are your options? So I mean, typically you've got Polar Stars. Everybody knows about them. You've got at the top of the line, you've got your Fusion. In my opinion, it goes from Fusion F2, Jack F1, and then you've got the mechanical Kythera, which I actually just installed in a Mark 18 myself, and I'm gonna go play with that pretty soon. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
of my opinion and use of all of those, I definitely think the Fusion engine is worth what they charge. I've had wonderful experiences with it. The trigger contact, I guess the button itself on the trigger board within the Fusion engine gearbox, it's a little different than all the other engines. It does seem a little more clicky or mechanical, if you will, but you can still get plenty of tuning and have a lot of fun with that. Do you have a preference on any of the Polar Stars, Peter?
I personally would put the F2 over the Fusion engine, and here's why. I've heard a lot of things in the past year about Polestar having a little bit of quality control. So some people will get an F2 engine, throw it in, get good settings and a good barrel setup, and it just doesn't turn out the best. But for me, I guess either I hit it lucky or I don't know what, but my current Polar Star build, with an upgraded barrel setup, nothing super fancy. The engine's completely stock as it comes. I run 60 psi to get 360 feet per second, which is our local field limit, and it shoots like a dream. On max psi, I'm getting about 570 FPS, and I can hit human-sized targets pretty accurately at about 250 feet with a three, and it's just worked super well for me. And the reason that I prefer the F2, you say, oh well, Fusion engine can do the same thing. The reason that I prefer an F2 over a Fusion engine is because stock, a Fusion engine is about $70 to $90 more out of the box than an F2, and unlike the Fusion engine, the F2 comes out of the box pre-installed with a low flow red poppet and red nozzle, which increases your air efficiency a lot. Also, like the Fusion engine, it comes with a forward bias nozzle to increase consistency and also accuracy and things like that. And the Fusion engine is fine stock, but often it's rare that people run it like that. People usually buy upgraded poppets, nozzles, S2 lightning banjo kits, the whole nine yards to make them up to their full potential. And I feel like the F2, for its price point, brings the boom to the table like straight out of the box as soon as you drop it in with a good barrel setup. But you know, it's hotly debated. That's why we're here today.
I could definitely agree that F2s have wonderful potential. I had one, I kept it for a while. I ended up getting rid of it just because it was time for me to move on just to something else. That's typically how it works for me, at least. But I can
I feel that.
say, just from an HPA versus AEG standpoint, if you're just asking that question, one of the biggest things that I know you mentioned before we spoke was you've got your barrel setups. That's something that some people either don't know much about or they understand it and they're wondering, do I need it? When do I have to get it? What should I get? It's typically, as you mentioned, probably more for the HPA engines up front. Are you going to want an upgraded barrel setup with that bucking, that new hop up, rather than we'll just say you're starting out and you're trying to see what to get, and you go and get that G&G combat machine, and you don't necessarily need to put any work directly into it on the barrel setup, at least to be a competitive player to shoot straight across a field.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There's I've seen there's actually a YouTuber in Miami called Dirt Airsoft. I don't know if he still makes videos, but uh most of his videos he was using completely bone stock G&G combat machine, and he never had to touch his barrel setup because that gun shot like 400 on the dot, 200 feet. He never had a problem with it. But with HPA, once again, sometimes you hit it lucky and the gun shoots beams out of the box. That's a lot of times that happens with Crytax. Crytax have good barrels and good hop ups out of the box. But like I feel like if you buy, and I've seen it done, like I know from experience, and I don't speak for everyone, but I do know in general that if you buy like a G&G combat machine, for instance, and you buy a Polar Star Jack and you just drop it in and run like that, it will shoot decent, but definitely not up to its full potential. You will not be getting your good range. Your accuracy will not be at best. Your consistency will not be at best. And the Jack is a great engine. It's a great starter engine. I personally would recommend people start with a Jack if you're getting into the HPA world, and then work your way up to something such as an F2 or a Fusion engine later on. But I feel like, for instance, like I was saying, a combat machine stock, bone stock AEG gearbox shoots beams. But when you swap it out, for an HBA engine, sometimes you hit it lucky on that off chance. But I feel like in general, that I can say from a decent amount of experience, that you're going to want to do some upgrades at least. Start with a bucking. Hop ups, are super popular as a first upgrade. Barrels are becoming more affordable for good quality barrels and such.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on though from Polar Stars, I know plenty of other companies are out there, but I think some of the biggest ones that everybody knows are going to be Wolverine, probably right underneath Polar Star. You've got the Valken V12, which really isn't heard of anymore.
Mm,
And then you've got you've got Tippmann, which a lot of people know they make plenty of paintball guns, what have you. There's a lot of stuff out there, plenty of it. I think over all of the companies though, and I've played with tons of things. I think if you're going to go the HPA route, Polar Star is probably your best bet. There's plenty of things you can do to it. I would say from everything I've experienced, Polar Star support, if you ever need to contact them, they're super helpful. And then there's plenty of companies out there that are able to provide the parts in the event, such as right now where things are getting hard to not only make from a company standpoint, but also get from a consumer standpoint. There's plenty of companies out there offering the parts that you need.
yeah. I like you mentioned like customization and stuff, because like you said, the Valken V12, for instance, like those haven't been made for like 2-ish years, 2-3 years, but those were super cheap. Those were like the price of a new Kythera, were they not? Unless I'm very much mistaken, somewhere around there. They were sub 300, if I understand correctly.
Mm-hmm.
At least before they stopped being manufactured. But were they were very unique because out of the box they kind of stunk, but they were very much like a fusion engine in the sense that they came as a whole gearbox, and you could throw upgrades into them, such as an upgraded trigger, uh, an upgraded nozzle, an upgraded poppet. And I've played with a Vulcan V12 before of my buddies, and he had maxed it out with the Vulcan V12 is compatible with Polar Star parts. He had put an S2 Lightning Banjo to increase that efficiency. He'd put a purple Polar Star fusion engine nozzle, and he had upgraded the poppet as well. And that gun was shooting about as good as a fully upgraded Polar Star Jack. So, and it was about the same price point, give or take a little bit. So, I think those are very unique, and I like that. Like Wolverine products, they can accept in select cases, if you do it right, that they can accept Polar Star electronics and things like that. So that's something to keep in mind when you're getting into the HPA world. There's a lot of possibilities, things you can mix and match, a lot of stuff, and you got to watch out for the quirks that come with that. Of course, mixing and matching products that weren't necessarily built for each other. But I just think that that's one of my favorite aspects about the HPA world.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely, like you said, there's plenty of customization. I guess one of the things we didn't harp on was one of those immediate things that people generally tend to flow towards is, as you just mentioned, triggers. So I would say the two biggest companies out there right now, you've got Speed, which was probably the first tunable trigger to come out, and then now you've got Max. And of the two that I've used, I'm a huge Max guy myself. I run their hop ups. I run their speed triggers more than anything else, and I've had nothing but good experiences. Although recently, I just actually got a speed trigger secondhand in a trade that I had done, and I've had great experiences with that as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I personally use I've used a speed trigger. I've had probably 10 different triggers that I've swapped out over my last 8 guns that I've owned, and I love them to death. And if there was one thing I would change about them, I wouldn't say change, I would say add, would be matte colors, like a matte black or a matte gray or things like that, or maybe even a tan trigger. If you have a Milsim gun, a tan curved trigger that's like a matte color, maybe even like a OD green. But anyway, yes. Also onto Max. Super impressed with the Max hop up. Like when those first came out, I thought, man, it's a bunch of bull. Oh, it's just a gimmick. Oh, it looks cool. It's fancy. It's got a window in the side. You can see the BBs. Oh, it's rotary style. Big whoop. And I finally was like, you know what? Let me just get one. I had some cash lying around. I got one. Never gonna have another hop up in any of my guns unless it's proprietary, I guess. But I'm gonna run max hop ups until the cows come home. I just love it. In my personal F2 build, I used to run a I used to run a stock VFC hop up in my gun. The gun shot great, and I thought, like, how could it possibly get better? Then I used a max. I switched out for a max ME Pro in gold, and according to the chrono, I hit a 40 FPS jump, and my consistency was within about 3 to 4 FPS of each other. It was great, and my consistency wasn't really on par with the old hop up. And I know a lot of that relies on the engine, but a hop up is a big factor that you have to take into consideration. And now I'll never go back. I love it to death. I can't wait to get more.
Yeah. So I guess moving on to the AEGs, then kind of some of the, well, I guess we didn't necessarily touch on some of the cons of having a Polar Star or any of those HPA engines, if you will.
Hmm.
So I guess the biggest drawback that we're going to touch on again when we get to the AEGs is the tank. So you've got to have a tank on you if you do something similar to a Euro Tactics build where you're going to have your tank screwed into your grip instead. You've still got to have a tank. You still got to have a regulator. It's extra cost. For the most part, those HPA engines, they're going to run you a decent bit of money. And then on top of that, now you have a necessary added cost that you are required to get.
Yeah, that's something that I wasn't betting on when I first got into the HPA world. My first ever engine was a Polar Star F1, and I saved up the money for it, and I bought the engine, and I got it in, and I was like this is awesome. And then I was just, I guess I was just really just that stupid because I didn't like realize you needed like a tank, a regulator, an airline. I didn't even know you needed a battery to run the FCU at the time. And that's something that I was kind of, it was a little bit cumbersome at first because I was like this air tank and all the pictures. I was like, well, that's about the size of a gallon of milk, which it's not really. The big ones can be, but it's something, it takes some getting used to. If you've run AEGs for, you know, like 6 or 7 years before you got into the HB world, like me, using a tank, having something that weighs several pounds on your back, in your stock, on your stock, wherever you have it, on your battle belt, it took some getting used to. Having a little added weight, it in a lot of cases it can limit your mobility, your maneuverability, but in general, like I said, it takes some getting used to. And I know it's an acquired taste, but it's been it's it's something you have to get used to. It's not just, oh, you just put it on and run off with it. It's, you gotta learn the quirks of it. Like I was saying earlier, like this setup, not running an AEG, having it propelled by something else other than a battery. It takes some getting used to. There's several factors to consider.
Absolutely. So I guess moving into the AEGs, then uh, one of the main topics we could point on is what are some of those starting rifles or good deals that we would probably direct people in the direction of. I know one of the best companies that I could represent and say over and over again, this is something that you need to go ahead and work with or buy is going to be G&G. So not only is the general quality and performance going to be good for a starting player, but for the most part, you can get a battery, rifle, and charger combo all in one box at the same time you purchase it. You don't have to buy the rifle. Oh, then I got to go buy a battery. Then I got to buy a charger. It all just
Hmm.
comes together at one cost. I think that's really, really nice. Um,
Yeah,
I know one of the starting rifles you might suggest that you and I have talked about before is that Matrix M4. I'll put a picture of it right now. And that stubby one that's now on the screen. The performance of it's pretty good out of the box, and for the price, you can't really beat it.
yeah. The S&T gearboxes, the S&T Sport line in particular, that gun comes uh, it comes in both black and tan, and in at least 12 to 15 different variations of both colors, which this is a super nice touch. And for the price point, the gun shoots great. In my experience, I've personally owned about 6 or 7 of those rifles now. And I know you might think, oh, that's ridiculous, or, you'd like to buy that many of one gun, but some I've bought for customers, a couple I've bought for customer builds. Most of them I've owned just for the heck of it. And believe me, I run $1,000 Polar Star build as my primary, but there are plenty. I have no qualms about using $130 when it's on sale. It's normally about 170, but using basically a bone stock Matrix rifle, and it shoots great. And in particular, the S&T gearboxes are some of my favorite stock gearboxes on the market because of the G2 the G2 gearbox design, which is proprietary for the most part. You'll have trouble fitting in upgraded gears or things like that, or MOSFETs. But speaking of the MOSFET, it comes with a microswitch MOSFET, a lot like what's in a G&G ARP9, which means you can sit there, and if it's your playstyle, you can sit there and you can just hammer on that trigger all day. And I have, believe me, I've burnt out several MOSFETs in those guns doing that. And it's just something, it's a nice touch. And even if you're not like that, and you just want to shoot normal, trigger finger, there's a lot of people, you come around a corner, it has no trouble keeping up. As fast as you can pull that trigger is as fast as it will shoot. And it shoots very consistent. And the gun in particular that I like is the stubby version. Comes with a fixed stubby stock, which those are very nice stocks, lots of battery space, but they also have a very short barrel, so they're great for CQB, and they're super great for clearing rooms, but they shoot super hard. Mine chronoed at 350 FPS, which I think was a little bit over what they're rated. They're rated for about 320 to 330, unless I'm very much mistaken. But those are super, super nice guns. I would put them on par with G&G. There are several G&G guns that are nicer though. Don't get me wrong. There are some flaws to that gun, obviously due to the price point, but super nice in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you just mentioned the ARP9. That was one that I was going to suggest only because I know I've helped sell plenty of them to people. I've mentioned them to people. They're great starter guns. It's one of those guns that they come out of the box and it's just ready to roll. And it's for
Hmm.
what it is, as I've already mentioned. Like the G&G rifles, for what they are at that cost, they're pretty good quality. And that one in particular is great. Plenty to do to
Hmm.
it, and you don't need to do a lot of it to make it what I would consider a high performing rifle. So I
Very
know
true.
we're doing some pros and cons here for AEG's HPA. I think one of the bigger ones for AEGs that I would say could be a con if you want to look at it this way. It also has its pros for customization reasons, but there being so many components inside that if you want to make it top tier, you've got to do everything if you want to do everything, or you can do a couple parts and eventually work up. But you have so many moving parts within it, and sometimes it limits people. So I can say that I personally am not an AEG tech. I can do Polar Stars all day long. I can do some minor work on AEGs, but there are a lot of moving parts in them, and it takes patience, it takes effort, and you have to know what you're doing. So if you were to get an AEG, you don't know what you're doing, you open it up, problems are probably going to occur.
Hmm. Yeah, I can definitely say that I prefer AEGs overall, but something if it's well taken care of, a Polar Star will last you years on end. You probably know Jude Hendricks, but
Hmm.
his Polar Star Jack, unless I'm very much mistaken, that is a Gen 1, like first batch Polar Star Jack. And that gun still shoots like 430 with a .3 on like 80 psi, and it still shoots clean, still shoots consistent. I mean, that thing straight up bores holes through people, and he's just taking care of it. He's lubed it. He's made sure that all the parts are properly aligned. He's had that gun since longer than I've known him, and Jude is an OG player at our local field, and that's just something that really stands out because there are some AEGs that will last you a long time. I know that, like for instance, the VFC Avalon, those things you can run those things into the ground. They're built like tanks. VFC Avalons are super nice. I know a couple of people at the battalion that haven't done a single thing to them, and they ran them for tournaments, indoor, outdoor. Depending on which one you get, they shoot 400 on the dot. And they also come with microswitch MOSFETs, LiPo protection, all the nooks and crannies. But like you said, there's a million and one parts moving. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but pistons moving, gears moving, motors moving, nozzles moving, your partridge in a pear tree. So, but with HPA, your engine, there's your poppet and your nozzle are moving. Like that's pretty much it. So that's why, depending on how much you use your Polar Star, how much it gets used and the environment and the conditions you use it in, it's often those guns are happy being lubed up and cleaned once a year or every however many thousand rounds. I've had my F2 for 2 years, and I had it lubed and cleaned for the first time like 3 weeks ago. And yeah, it was dirty, but and it was a little dry because it's air passing through. It's not like a green gas pistol where there's lube in the air, But stuff needs to be lubed and stuff. That's the nature of the beast. But it's great, and the performance was not lacking at all. I just thought, you know what, it's probably time to do it. I haven't done it yet, and that's something that was super nice. I put the gun together, and as long as you take care of it, I haven't really had to worry about it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm also a big fan of suggesting KWA to people. Those things are, as you mentioned, similar to Avalon, at least performance-wise. I think out of the box you can run those things into the ground. I know doing
Mm-hmm.
some higher end builds, a lot of people they tend to stick with the KWA gears.
Yeah.
So
Myself, yeah, I'm having a new gun built, and it's a mixture of two different gear sets, but I'm using KWA gears. They're built like tanks.
yeah, so one of the things that we also hadn't mentioned was if your budget's going to provide for it with an AEG, you could always get into DSGs or SSGs. That's going to be your dual sector gear or single sector gear. It's going to give you a higher fire rate typically when you're going to full auto, although SSGs tend to be more of your semi-oriented rifles if you're going to build something out like that. And we do some work like that. We do some pre-built rifles that people can purchase, and typically the ones we do, that's pretty much your highest capable point in airsoft that you can do. We currently have one up for sale, and we are tuning and finishing one more, and that's going to be up on our site pretty soon. All right, guys, so that's all we got today on this topic. We're curious what you guys think. Go ahead and let us know what you think in the comments. Pete, as always, thanks for tuning in and coming up here for us. And that's
Yes,
going to
sir.
be
Yes,
it
sir.
from the 6mm studio at One Stop, guys. Have a good one.
Let's get it. Hop off a 16 passenger. This a G5, no, this not a Challenger. Big one. I keep some members.